Hey everybody, my name is Pedro, and today I am talking about the books that I read in the month of July 2020. I read 8 books in the month of July, and I'm excited to talk about them now. If you could hit the like button and the subscribe button below, that would be great. And let's get started with the books that I read. The first book I read in the month of July was Endurance by Alfred Lansing, which was written in 1959. And I made a video already for this book, so I will put a link to that video, which summarizes the book. But I loved this book. This book is about Ernest Shackleton and his ill-fated expedition to Antarctica. And it's just an all-around adventure story, and I loved it from beginning to end. It was amazing to think how they got themselves into such a crazy situation and then what they did to get out of it. And so yeah, go check out that video. I go into more detail, but long story short, Shackleton led a group down to Antarctica, and the plan was to cross all of Antarctica to be the very first land crossing of the continent. Things go wrong, and they end up getting stuck in ice, in an ice sheet, and they were there for a year and a half, and then they made it to another island for 6 months. But overall, for 2 years, they were stranded. But they all survived, and the book is just amazing. I think it's well written and really one of the craziest survival stories of all time. The second book I read was American Ulysses by Ronald C. White, and it's about Ulysses S. Grant. And yeah, it was a really good book. It was very interesting. I didn't know anything about President Grant before this book, so it was good to learn about him and kind of his role in history. For those of you who don't know who he was the 18th president of the United States of America. The meat of the book is him as a general in the Civil War, so it goes into a lot of detail there about that. And I've never really read about the Civil War, so it was interesting to kind of get my first taste of that part of our history here in America. Overall, I really did enjoy the book. I found it interesting. I think it's interesting to read about different time periods and kind of just to see the way life was lived then, especially the life of someone who was so successful in what they did to be so successful in that time. Overall, it was a really good book. I did find it really interesting, and I learned a lot. I kind of have it in the middle of the pack as far as the books I read this month. It's not super great, but it's not bad, but it was enjoyable. The third book I read was Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. And I already made a video about this book, so I'll put a link to that video. But in the video, I talk about how I watched Hamilton on Disney Plus, and it was the first time I'd listened to the soundtrack or seen the musical. And I was just blown away. I thought the story of Alexander Hamilton was so compelling. So I wanted to go and read the book Alexander Hamilton. The book was amazing. I absolutely loved it. It's a well-written biography, and from start to finish, it never gets dry, even though it's a longer book. And I think that's because Hamilton really was such a unique individual in our history, and learning about him and the struggles and obstacles he overcame and just more about him was fascinating. And I liked it so much that I read another book, so book number 4 was Washington, which was also written by Ron Chernow. This book is even longer, and it's about President Washington, George Washington. And I'll be honest, obviously I know who George Washington is, and I know I can list a handful of things that he accomplished and what he did, but I don't feel like I really knew that much about him. In the book, it talks about how George Washington has kind of become this mythical figure, hollow, and has had a lot of the humanity of the man stripped away. And I think that's kind of how I felt about him too. And so that's why I loved Washington, the book, because I learned so much more about the man himself, his goals and his ambitions and what he stood for. In the middle of the book, after it talks about the Revolutionary War, and here he is, General Washington, the most powerful man in the country, and he gives up that power and gives it back to the people. And the book talks about how, here is this guy who was so powerful, and he's the first time in history with a military leader who has so much power who willingly gives it up. And I think that really is a testament to who George Washington was as a person. and really what we needed at the early stages of the United States. I also learned a lot about his loyalty and what he sacrificed for America, and I think he really just wanted to be a farmer and go back to Mount Vernon and spend time there. But he comes out of retirement multiple times, to be president of the United States. And all of that really was a sacrifice, but he did it because of his love for the country and because of the values that drove the man. And again, I can't say enough good things about Washington. This was just a tremendous book. Ron Chernow does such a good job in both Alexander Hamilton and Washington at taking these complex men and such a storied history and weaving it into a very digestible biography, where I personally felt as a reader that I was learning so much about their lives and about these principles that they employed to be successful, and also how that plays out from a historical standpoint and where their histories fit into the world's history. So absolutely loved it. I've read another book by Ron Chernow called Titan, and I really liked that book as well. So I'm going to check out a few more of his books. But I will say in the month of July, I'd say my favorite books were Washington and Alexander Hamilton. Okay, so the next book I read was In the Strength of the Lord by Jim Bell. And this is a biography of James E. Faust, who was a leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it was a really good biography. It was interesting. So Elder Faust, he would only he'd only contribute to this biography getting made if half of the book was about his life and the other half was about his teachings. And I think that really talks about who this guy was. He didn't want focus to be on his life and what he did, but more on what he taught. It was really interesting. The second half of the book is topical and it's alphabetical and just goes through all these things that he had taught. And I was a little worried about getting to that section, but I was able to read through it, and it really wasn't too bad. And I did learn a lot. I really liked this book. Definitely had some takeaways for my own life. The sixth book I read in July was Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and another very interesting book. This is the third book I've read this year by Taleb, and I will say he's definitely changed the way I think about a lot of things. I find his books to be so fascinating. Every page is like a gem of things that I've just never considered and different ways to think about life. I will say the way he writes is very unique. He comes across in his writing as very arrogant, it's almost comical reading through it, because he basically has the position that he is the smartest guy and everyone else is dumb. And I know that sounds really funny, but if you read his books, that's really the tone of each page. And if you can digest that and get past that arrogance, I think there's a lot of hidden gems in his books. And Fooled by Randomness was his first book that he wrote, and it's about chance in life and chance in the markets, or randomness in life and markets. It makes the statement that a lot of the things we see in this world, people who are successful, a lot of that really is due to luck and to randomness, and that we just naturally are biased to successful stories, and we always see the winners, but we never see the losers. And because of that, we overestimate, our chances to succeed. So in some ways, this book is almost about behavioral economics, similar to like Freakonomics, if you've ever read that book. It was a great book. I did learn a lot. It's not my favorite from Taleb. He has a book called The Black Swan, which is his most well-known book, and another book called Anti-Fragile that I've read. And those books are really just amazing. But this one is really good. A lot of it's about probability as well, so he goes into some probability theory, and it's pretty dense stuff, but I feel like he explains it pretty well. So there's not a ton of numbers on each page, but he explains these concepts and why we let our emotions hijack our rational side when we see success, and randomness. And so, yeah, definitely love this book. If that is interesting to you or sounds interesting to you, I think you'd like this book. And yeah, even go check out The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile as well. The seventh book I read was A Disciple's Life by Bruce C. Hafen, and it's a biography about Elder Neal A. Maxwell. I did a video about this book as well, so I will put a link up here so you can go check it out. But this, like I said, is about Elder Neal A. Maxwell, who was a leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I really loved this biography. I think I made the statement in the video that this is my favorite book I've ever read about a church leader. Definitely learned so much that was very applicable to my own life. So yeah, definitely go check out my other video about that book. And finally, the eighth book that I read in July is The Answer Is by Alex Trebek. And definitely enjoyed this one. It's a really, really short read. You can read it in a few hours. And Alex Trebek, those of you who don't know, he's the longtime host of Jeopardy! And he was recently diagnosed with cancer. And this book came kind of out of reflections he had been having as he's battling cancer right now. And the reason why I said it's not an autobiography, I mean, it is, but it's a little different. It's comprised of, I think, 75 chapters, and they're really, really short. And they're just little stories from his life. It's not chronological, but he just gives insights into different things that have happened on Jeopardy! But also does tell kind of his life story. I actually listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Ken Jennings. For those of you who know that name, he was one of the winningest, I think he is the winningest contestant ever to play Jeopardy! And yeah, so it was cool to hear his narration of this book. So the book it's interesting to learn more about Alex Trebek. I do respect him a lot. You know, he has been in the spotlight for so long, but has lived a pretty scandal-free life. And overall, I just think he's a really good guy. And I think that kind of is pretty apparent as you read through the book and just kind of the things he's done. So if you're a fan of Jeopardy! And Alex Trebek, I think you will very much love this book. I did enjoy it. It was, like I said, it was short. I don't know if I came away with profound, life-changing ideas or principles, but it was nice. It was really good to get to know about Mr. Trebek. Those were the books that I read in the month of July. Hopefully you found this video to be interesting, and hopefully you found a book that maybe you would like to read. Let me know in the comments below what book you would most like to read from the books that I read in July. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope all of you have a good day.